Hello, and welcome to the Scope of Things podcast, a no-nonsense look at the promise and problems of clinical research based on a sweep of the latest news and emerging trends in the field, and what I think is worthy of your 30 or so minutes of time. I'm Deborah Borfitz, Senior Science Writer for Clinical Research News, which means I spend a lot of time with my ear to the ground on your behalf, and a lot of hours every week speaking to top experts from around the world. Please consider making this your trusted go-to channel for staying current on things that matter, whether they give us hope or cause for pause. In another 15 minutes or so, I'll be speaking with Dezbee McDaniel, co-founder and CEO of CliniSpan Health, the first ever clinical trial tech pitch contest winner at last month's Summit for Clinical Ops Executives, SCOPE, in Orlando. He'll be fielding a few questions about the company's novel social media influencer relationship management platform for improving clinical research diversity. But first, my rundown of some of the late-breaking news and emerging trends that have caught my attention, all of which come directly from educational sessions and events at Scope, which had a record-breaking 4,000 people in attendance. This month's coverage includes conversations about the convergence of clinical research and clinical care, the Oliver Patch Project, benefiting pediatric studies, hot topics such as patient centricity, protocol complexity, and growing use of AI. Pfizer's Time is Life approach to accelerating clinical development, a protocol bowl game hosted by Proofpilot, a patient data return initiative of Transcelerate, an update on decentralized clinical trials, the need to start managing rather than simply simplifying complex protocol designs, and a fireside chat with the FDA. Day one of Scope opened with a conversation about how to better integrate clinical research into clinical care and make patient centricity more of a reality than a buzzword. The vision of bringing trials to patients could materialize over the next 15 years, according to a mixed group of clinical trial stakeholders, although it may require borrowing the business model of Elon Musk in his quest to get man to the moon. As imagined by Transcelerate CEO Janice Chang, clinical research will in the future be among the first options considered, not one of the last resorts. Decluttering the way clinical research gets done is the first order of business, she says. I'll provide a link to the full story on the keynote panel discussion in the show notes. I want to give a quick hats off to Participant Engagement Award winner Brian Burkhart on behalf of the Oliver Patch Project. He brought tears to the room with the story of his young son, Oliver, stricken with leukemia, who inspired the launch of the nonprofit that sends patches to other kids in pediatric studies simply to give them something to look forward to. Kudos, Brian, for transforming your heartache into tokens of love for thousands of little warriors across the country. There were many repeating themes throughout the conference: patient centricity, as well as challenges with recruitment and diversity, protocol complexity, artificial intelligence, decentralization, and tech innovation. Although the sessions collectively covered all the nooks and crannies of clinical research conduct, and attendees, most in their football jerseys on Super Bowl Sunday, were visibly excited to network and learn from one another. I personally love the addition of the virtual #AskPatients Lounge, spearheaded by the Savvy Cooperative, which is looking to normalize interactions between study sponsors and real patients who get compensated for their input. And the book signing line for Barnett International's newly released GCP reference guide was insane. One 25-year quality management specialist I chatted with said she was there for a fresh copy because the 2014 version of the guide she had back at the office was all marked up and tabbed like her Bible. The book explains it all, she says, adding, "Have you seen FDA regulations?" Day 2 plenary keynote was delivered by Pfizer's head of clinical development and operations, Robert Goodwin, playing off the company's Time is Life slogan and the realization that the industry is falling back into its old ways now the pandemic is finally over. He is a fan of benchmarking to get things done, notably improving recruitment metrics, and admits that sponsors can be their own worst enemy by putting out protocols that are unattractive to sites and participants and difficult to put into operation. Quality is job one, but Pfizer also has ambitious speed and cost-cutting goals that include further improving its operational cycle time performance by removing an additional 3 years in 3 years by partnering differently. During COVID, that meant greater reliance on AI, digital people, and decentralized clinical trials. The focus is currently on Pfizer Link, a clinical trial registry hoping to sign up 1 million people willing to share their data so that they can be matched with studies at enrolling sites. During another panel session on use cases for generative AI, a general manager with Microsoft Research says the sweet spot is in empowering human expertise to, for example, predict the next major medical event for individuals, self-correct errors of omission, and ultimately to create virtual control arms for trials, or, as suggested by other panelists, to produce the first draft of a study protocol or build better predictive models with the addition of more data from outside the U.S., notably Asia. An enormous number of companies lined every square inch of floor space in the exhibit hall, and many of them were new on the scene. I was drawn to the booth for Magnolia. I guess that's the way you pronounce it. It's Magnol.ai, a cloud platform for the management of high-frequency sensor data that has been deployed for 20 trials at Eli Lilly. The company is now out-licensing the technology, and the first taker was Proof Pilot, which announced last fall that Magnolia was being integrated into its clinical trial automation platform. Speaking of which, one of the highlights at Scope this year was an industry-first protocol bowl hosted by Proof Pilot's Joseph Kim, who kindly provided me with an eyewitness account of the event. It was a head-to-head demonstration of the power of digital protocols to deliver efficient, high-quality execution of clinical trials. One team, made up of representatives from GlaxoSmithKline, Astellas, and AstraZeneca, was pitted against another with representatives from Hightower Clinical, Javara, and Atlas Research to execute a one-page protocol made up of activities like swirling a rally towel above your head and barking like a dog into the microphone. The sites were armed with Proof Pilot's digital protocol automation product, providing real-time guidance, while sponsors had to rely solely on the written document, laid out with the typical trappings of footnotes and hard-to-decipher instructions, Joseph reports. Out of the gate, the sponsors immediately had a protocol deviation, and in the end took much longer than the sites to execute the entire protocol. During the post-game analysis, it was clear to both teams that the conventional way of delivering instructions to sites, protocols, manuals, and slide decks resulted in confusion, reduced confidence, and ultimately created an environment where errors and deviations thrive. I personally sat in on a session about personalizing trials, which centered on a participant data return initiative of Transcelerate, enabling sponsors to provide meaningful individual healthcare data back to study volunteers. Following guideposts first developed by the Multi-Regional Clinical Trials Center of Brigham and Women's Hospital and Harvard, and using a template created by Pfizer as a starting point. Data return is seen as a great way to build trust with patients and drive the convergence of clinical research and clinical care, as well as prepare sponsors for a likely forthcoming mandate to do this. The patients who stand to benefit most here are those who screen fail from a trial and don't have to unnecessarily repeat procedures when they go to another option for care. Transcelerate has a resource pack available on its website. I'll link to it in the show notes, which includes 3 solutions to help companies launch their own shareback program: a socialization presentation, a considerations guide, and a template example of how a study team might capture important operational details for enabling individual data return at a study or program level. A speaker from ICON presented on the next phase of decentralized clinical trials, which today are more fit for purpose and business as usual than uncertain and unavoidable, as was the case during the pandemic. Last year, the uptick in DCTs was seen only in the government sector for COVID-related studies, but overall, they're gaining momentum in oncology. Surveys indicate what patients want are options, and when they must travel to a study site, that the journey be less than an hour. In terms of regulatory authorities, less than 10% of countries have their own DCT regulations and guidelines, the FDA in the US and EMA in Europe being the 2 big exceptions. DCT operating models and SOPs remain big needs. But when properly conducted, DCTs have been shown to increase patient recruitment, retention, and diversity, as well as improve compliance and enrollment times. They also tend to be cost neutral, with savings on site activities shifting to concierge services. Ken Getz, executive director at the Tufts Center for the Study of Drug Development, reports that the complexity of study protocols has only escalated over the last 2 decades, and the issue is disease and phase agnostic, and that the hybridization of trials, meaning conducted remotely as well as on-site, only adds to the problem. Between 2010 and 2020, all protocol design variables saw dramatic growth, especially the number of endpoints in trials, which nearly doubled. Protocols tend to be highly customized, which is inversely related to performance in terms of cycle times, enrollment duration, total amendments, and study dropout rates. In North America, 40% of sites will not even activate. Optimization efforts tried to date have all failed, including open dialogue between sponsors and regulators. The Tufts Center has developed a tool for quantifying the burden of trial participation tied to study procedures, as well as shown that patient advisory board input on study design results in cycle times that come close to plan or beat it. Ken's take-home message: simplifying protocol design should not be the primary goal, but rather managing complex designs to optimize performance. Ken also moderated a fireside chat with two FDA representatives on the topic of modernizing clinical trials, where the conversation shifted to the growing number of submissions with an AI component and the need for better collaboration internally at the agency. The FDA has been openly talking about the appropriate use of artificial intelligence in advancing science and is inviting feedback on a discussion paper it published last year in advance of formal guidance that is expected sometime soon. It also held a workshop last year on the challenges and opportunities related to the use of digital health technologies during the drug development process and has issued a slew of guidances around DCTs, as well as real-world data and real-world evidence, which, as was pointed out, the agency has been using since its birth. Addressing a full house of clinical ops executives, the Deputy Director of Operations in the FDA's Office of New Drugs says that when it comes to execution, you guys are in the driver's seat. Without any further ado, I now invite to the mic CliniSpan Health's Dezbee McDaniel, who is intent on maximizing the power of social media influencers to increase clinical trial participation among people of color residing in underserved communities. Welcome to the show, Dezbee, and congratulations on your big win at the Clinical Trial Tech Pitch Contest.
Thank you so much, Deb. I appreciate that very much. That was an amazing experience, and we were super glad to be a part of it, and I'm hoping that it can continue to be as amazing as the first one.
I was happy to be in the front row. Okay, let's start with what motivated you to start CliniSpan Health. I know you shared this during the pitch to investors at Scope, but can you reshare that tale for the benefit of listeners? Because it was an emotionally moving story that involved your aunt.
Yep, for sure. So my Aunt Sherri, she had breast cancer, and she did thankfully beat it. But in her post-chemo experience, she always saw the rare side effects of the drugs that she was taking. Even when doctors assured she wouldn't. And so throughout that experience, she was asking the doctor about why this was happening, and they could never really help her understand. And what we had to do was actually use our influence and relationship with her as a family to research that ourselves. And we found that there were not enough Black women present in the trials for those drugs. And so that was something that, we were really confused about why the doctor couldn't help us understand that. And that we had to take upon ourselves to do that. And my aunt really lost trust in her relationship with the doctor. And so that was one thing that really pushed me to care about this problem a lot more. And once I started doing my own research, I saw stats like there are about 40% people of color in the U.S., but the rate of inclusion is as little as 2 up to only 16%. And that ultimately means that people have the same experience as my aunt, where when they take drugs, they actually end up in a worse health state when the drug was designed to put you in a better health state. And so, I was really torn throughout this experience and learning more about that. And I come from a family of healthcare innovators. And so it just felt like my call to action, when all of that was happening at the same time. And, CliniSpan Health was born just from, like I said, my frustrations and my experience with my aunt and really caring about helping her and communities at large have better medicine.
Yeah, well, what a healthy way to channel that. Kudos to you. Can you briefly describe how it is powered by AI, I believe, an AI-powered CliniSpan Health platform works and how you find and convince social media influencers to sort of take up the cause of promoting clinical trial involvement?
Yes, so we have an influencer matching algorithm. So the algorithm is reading two different things. It's reading the demographic of our influencer network. It's also reading the demographics of their social media followers. And so it's able to recommend the top influencer matches based on the fact that we know that they are of the same race and ethnicity as the patient you're looking for. They're in the same geography. And that ultimately they come from the same cultural backgrounds. And so our algorithm is basically optimizing for cultural competence is kind of how it works. And that's, as you know, I'm sure, is a huge reason I think that certain communities aren't connected with as well is that there isn't enough cultural engagement. You know, there's a lot of engagement, but it's not necessarily in an understanding and comfortable way. And the AI really gives us the ability to have the highest cultural competence. These influencers look like, walk like, talk like the people that they're trying to reach. And we're able to use those predictive analytics to actually hypothesize the likelihood of reaching your patient or not. So that really is how the AI works itself. As far as the influencers, as you can imagine, they live on social media. And so we reach out to them via social media, hopping into their direct messages. We actually create cool content that influencers like. One of the things we've noticed that influencers always do before they get on our platform is check our social media. So they want to basically see, do we have cool content, right? Do we have a lot of followers? Do we have a good social presence? And so having a good social presence is a huge part of it. And then also reaching out to them in like I said, a cultural way, comfortable way. These influencers live on their social media platform, so they want to receive, opportunities on their social media platform. And as I mentioned, even at the pitch, reaching out at first was a bit difficult because people didn't want to push people into being what they thought of as a guinea pig, right? Or related to the Tuskegee syphilis study or the HeLa cells, where people are like, yeah, I don't want to help create that kind of reality. And we learned that we can actually encourage people and let them know that by them promoting health equity with their social media, they can actually guarantee and help work towards a guarantee that never happens again to people. And we really learned that resonates well with people. They really feel like a community hero, like a health hero, and are also able to get some compensation at the same time of being able to feel, like they're really helping their community. So that's been the biggest kind of sell to influencers, is that they can really make their communities a lot better through doing this.
Gotcha. And can I assume we're talking the big social media channels like Facebook and Twitter now, X, Instagram?
Yep.
Okay.
Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, TikTok. And then there are also others those are the focal points. There are others, there's a college age social media app called Be Real. So, we're trying to reach a certain age group of trial participants. It varies based on what platform we might use. For example, TikTok would be a younger audience, anywhere from 18 to probably 30 years old, or 18 to 25. 30 to 45, 30 to, 40 something, mid 40s might be Instagram. And then, a 50 plus, 45 plus would be Facebook. So we always tap influencers on a specific channel based on different variables like age group, for example. Just know that, certain groups are present on certain channels.
Yep. That makes total sense. Okay. So who are your customers for the platform, and are they subscribers? Are they licensing the technology and interacting directly with these social media influencers for their studies on an as needed basis? Or how does that work?
So we are working with top 20 pharma customers like a CSL. So they're one of our premier customers, and that's our target customer, a mid to large size pharma sponsor who is looking to engage with underserved patients for their studies. And especially that are looking for newer age marketing methods like leveraging social media. Those are our primary customers. They are licensing the technology. Okay. So they are getting access. It's subscriptions currently, and then we are actually growing to licensing the technology. So currently, they subscribe to the platform. We have 6 to 12 month subscription plans, and they're able to basically go on and find influencers for any study that they might have. So they can go on, they can put in the campaign specs, the platforms they want to reach people, any particular campaign instructions. They can then put the patient target, the gender of the patient, the age range, and the race or ethnicity they're looking for. And then we use those inputs to actually match them to the top recommended influencers. And so their subscription is doing two things: making it available that they can actually tap influencers, search them, and be matched to them immediately. And then number two is they can actually manage their relationship with these influencers through the technology. So they can actually reach out and request that the influencer is on their campaign, And then the influencer can immediately start posting and actually helping to find patients in the underserved communities.
Okay, very good. How many trials have you been involved with to date? And what kind of therapeutic areas?
Yep. So we have been involved in, I want to say 20 plus trials
Okay.
over the 3 years. And we've had a 7.5 times average higher inclusion rate on studies that our technology is involved in. And what was the second part of your question?
The therapeutic areas?
Yeah, so the therapeutic areas, the top three that we have are eczema. So dermatology is one. Eczema and psoriasis is really huge for us. Asthma is an area that is really great for us. And infectious diseases and vaccines. So if you think COVID, flu, CMV, RSV, those are top areas for us. But outside of that, what we try to focus on is areas that acutely affect people of color.
Gotcha.
So, lupus, for example, diabetes, a particular few areas that affect people of color at a high rate. And we know that they aren't involved in trials. We try to focus on areas like that as well, just because we feel like we can, successfully get more people into that area and actually help a lot more.
Gotcha. Okay. I know CliniSpan Health has made some impressive strides over the past few years, and I'm hoping you can also share some of those milestones that I know won you points with pitch contest judges. So what can you tell us on that front? I guess not just, the influencers and where they reside, but, sales pipeline and the uptick in diversity, inclusion rates achieved, et cetera, et cetera.
Yes, so we have 8,000 influencers across the U.S. and Canada currently. With that, we are reaching 17 million plus potential patients. They have 2,000 followers each. And we have made over $1 million of revenue over the life of the business. We have had a 7.5 times average higher inclusion rate. We have more than $2.5 million in our sales pipeline currently. Top 5 states for us are Florida, New York, North Carolina, California, and Texas. So that's where we have the most influencers and the most reach. But because of the digital nature of our platform, we have a heavy ability to reach people in rural areas, unlike a lot of clinical trial outreach. We're able to tap influencers in rural areas if that's what we're looking for, right? Where let's use I'm not sure if you're familiar with the Greensboro, North Carolina, but that's a pretty rural area. We can actually find influencers in Greensboro, North Carolina, who then, when they're reaching out to their followers on social media, their followers are also in Greensboro, North Carolina as well. And so a lot of the conversation I have industry-wide is about how people in rural areas aren't getting communicated to or getting proper access to trials. And so that's something that we're heavily able to do as well with our software, is actually find those people in rural areas and communicate to them through this. And so, that's a huge advantage of what we do, compared to other, I think, solutions, reaching out to underserved patients.
Yeah. And this kind of gets my last point. I want to get to you as well. The judges push you to talk about how CliniSpan Health differentiates itself from bigger players out there, notably the social media marketing platform Sprinkler, which I had never heard of. As I recall, where you stood out was in terms of trial-specific education with these influencers. Is that correct? Could you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah, for sure. So during the pitch, actually, I brought up the point that 50% of all clinical trial participants are found on Facebook ads. And so the industry is doing pretty much the same thing. Marketing for marketing is putting budget into Facebook ads, competing for the same pool of patients and hoping that you can win out from all of the marketers. And so where we differentiate is helping you reach people on other channels of social media, right? Where we talked about earlier, other platforms like an Instagram, a TikTok, a Twitter, or an X. The Be Real was an example I gave. So we're helping you compete for patients on platforms where there is no other competition currently, right? So that is a huge advantage from our standpoint. Being able to use multiple social media channels versus competing on the same exact channel on Facebook with the whole industry. So we're basically helping you get in a less crowded space by getting into these other channels. Number two, the algorithm itself is a huge advantage. So being able to immediately search and match yourself to influencers, again, that's an industry first solution. There are no other platforms leveraging influencers, and especially not in the way that we are, where you can match to the top recommended influencers immediately. So getting them on other channels to compete in a less crowded space, and then building this AI algorithm where you can match to influencers immediately and use predictive analytics to look at the chances of success. Those are really the differentiators for us.
Mm-hmm. Okay. The education piece, though, is also important, correct? The education of them. Yeah. Okay.
For sure. So as far as the education itself, that just comes down to, how we make the content. We use things like reels and memes. One thing I was talking about was educating people through something like SpongeBob memes, for example, right? That if I said that to most marketing teams industry-wide, they would be like, what? This guy's crazy. But we at CliniSpan Health have found success with that, where adding a little bit of humor to the education through things like reels and memes, those are contemporary content types on social media today. And we noticed that no one in clinical research had exactly used a reel or a meme to educate anyone or to push someone to a clinical trial. So that is a huge advantage for us as well, is we feel like we understand how to speak to people today, right?
Gotcha.
We understand social media, we understand the content, and we know how to pair the content and channels together for a very effective outreach.
Okay, gotcha. Well said. Okay, so what's next, and what's ahead for CliniSpan Health? Where do you expect to be in another, say, 3 to 5 years?
Yes, lots of growth. So that's very much where we're going. Definitely number one thing, building out the AI infrastructure. So we want to really build our algorithm to be as best as it can, right? We want the predictive analytics to be 99% accurate, right? That when we say an influencer is 60% likely to find your patient target, that is true 9 out of 10 times, ideally 10 out of 10 times. Mm-hmm. So that's really where we're doing a lot of growth right now in the product, is making sure that it's an industry best product and that it works every time that it should work. So that's the first focus. Secondly, is that we have 50,000 plus influencers. So, in that 3 to 5 timeline, we see really anywhere from 50 to 100,000 influencers across not just the US and Canada, but expanding to countries like the UK, expanding to European countries, for example. So, 50 to 100,000 influencers in countries in Europe, being able to create impact for underserved communities, in other countries. That really is where we see CliniSpan Health going. And then the ultimate growth thing that we see is really being able to be in other healthcare verticals, being able to educate people with influencers in a more general health way. Where we are educating maybe about drugs, we're educating about the effects from a trial, right? So not just that we're reaching out to people about trials and educating them on that, but a drug now at some company has been passed, it's going through all the trials. Maybe we actually promote the findings of the trials through influencers, right? So there are a lot of other areas that we can promote health education, health information, hospital systems, people in underserved communities don't necessarily know and understand the structure of hospital systems. Well, we can educate people on that better so that they can actually use primary, secondary, emergency care services better, right? So there are a lot of other areas that we see a lack of cultural education and engagement as it relates to healthcare. And so we want to really grow to other areas once we feel like we have found success in the clinical research space specifically.
Wow. So just the beginning. How exciting. Yeah, wow. This is definitely important and difficult work as well, Dezbee. So thank you for taking it on and doing it so well. Congratulations again, and good luck in scaling CliniSpan Health and chipping away at what is unquestionably one of the most stubborn issues in clinical research, finding the right patients who are also willing to participate.
Yes. Thank you so much, Deb. With people like yourself, and platforms like the Clinical Trial Tech Pitch Competition, companies like ourselves are given a chance to really show what we can do, and show how we can change the industry and show how we can help patients in underserved communities. So thank you for giving us the platform to do that.
Oh, well, you're certainly welcome. And I'm so happy you could be with us today. As always, a big thank you also to everyone out there for listening in. If you're not subscribed to this podcast yet, please consider going to Apple Podcasts and doing so right now so you don't miss your monthly dose of news and perspectives you'll be hard-pressed to find anywhere else. And if you're up for it, I'd be so very grateful if you'd leave a rating and review while you're there. For more straight talk on studies involving humans, visit clinicalresearchnewsonline.com. And if you're a clinical research professional, we hope also to see you at our next Scope conference, where we make things happen. Bye for now.